Hey yo everybody, what's up? My name is Demo1138. You can call me Demo, and I'm back for another quick video. I'm doing another quick one. Basically, I'm just gonna something on my mind. Want to get it out real fast, so there's not gonna be any pictures or whatever. Last time I did this, the video went for 13 minutes. I don't know. Is that short? Is that long? I don't know. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, no, it's something I've been thinking about, and maybe think about this a little bit more than I should. It's not healthy, but kind of getting frustrated. I have a little bit of a pet peeve with the concept of lore. I'm putting some air quotes on this. And before I get like all the way into it, I'm not anti-lore. Lore is great, but there's like this like weird fixation I think that people are having with the whole concept. And this affects a lot of things. This affects games. This affects movies. It's a little less annoying in games because games tell stories differently than movies do. So lore in a video game is maybe a little bit more important than it is in like a movie or something. But a lot of the criticisms that I have about lore in general, they're going to be framed within the context of a movie, but a lot of these criticisms translate over to video games as well. So, and I guess I can sum it up for you in 5 seconds, and after I'm done saying this, you can stop listening to the friggin' video if you want. But I do follow up with some examples. But the thing that pisses me off is lore is not story. Lore is not narrative. Lore is setting. Lore is context. Lore is world building. Lore is character development. It is not story. You cannot make a compelling narrative on lore alone. And on the other side of that coin, you can tell a really, really good story with no lore. And this obsession with lore is just kind of driving me crazy, and it's kind of ruining things that would otherwise be pretty good if people weren't so lore brained. And in fact, my first I don't know if I want to call these examples, but these are like instances of the different ways people manage lore, and and we're going to talk about the ones that I think are good, and we're going to start with Lord of the Rings, actually, and not the movies. I'm talking about the books specifically. The movies in the TV shows and all of the I don't know if you want to call it extended universe Lord of the Ring, all that shit is lore brained and gross. And all the stuff that's based on Lord of the Rings is lore brained and gross. But let's look at lore in the original Lord of the Rings, right? So in the main novels, and you're looking at the trilogy plus the Hobbit, they talk about the lore, they mention it, but they use it in the way that I was saying earlier. They use it as a way to establish the setting, right? Because lore is setting, lore is not narrative. The narrative of that book follows the characters and the events that happen to them, right? And to prove to you in some way that lore is not narrative, we can look at the Silmarillion, right? So if you don't know, you probably do know. But if you don't know, the Silmarillion was essentially a book that contains all of the lore of Lord of the Rings, right? And it reads a bit more like an old textbook than like a novel, or maybe even like an old like religious book, But yeah, like 99.9% of the lore of Lord of the Rings is put into that, and it's not really a good read. Nobody's finished it. If you're going to come in my comments and be like, Lord of the Rings, lore is awesome, Silmarillion was awesome, you didn't read it, dude. I know you didn't read it. Nobody read it. Because you get fucking 6 pages in and you're like, okay, you know what? This is drier than sandpaper. And, furthermore, if you look at, like, the history of the Silmarillion, it almost never came out, right? Because Tolkien couldn't get it published because publishers who know, what is good and what people are going to like, it's their job to know that. no, the publishers wouldn't touch it, right? And it wasn't only until after he died where Tolkien's son kind of took the reins and released the Silmarillion. And when it came out, it flopped, right? Um, and so none of this is to say that the stuff in the Silmarillion is bad, right? Like, it's all really creative, and it does. It's an exercise in world building. It's great, but it's only going to be interesting to the 0.01% of Lord of the Rings fans that are just fucking obsessed, right? And I say 0.01 because even the top 10% will pick up the book. The top 0.01% will actually read it. None of you read it. I know one guy who probably read it. And this kid's read every single book in existence. And he'll probably agree with me. But yeah, so I think, I don't think Tolkien did a good job because he was trying to get this published. I think the publishers did a good job of saying, hey, you know what? All this lore is great, but let's pack it in a separate package. Let's release a fucking story with narrative, and then we can put this stuff over here. We can still make it available, but, somebody who just wants to pick up a fantasy novel and read it can read it without being bogged down in all this nonsense, right? An example, and I'm going to talk about one of my favorite movies of all time. I think this is the best. I think this is the best movie that was ever made in my lifetime. But the Mad Max series, my favorite being Fury Road. We can argue about it. That's fine. But I love all of the Mad Max movies. Some better than others, including the first one, which is honestly like a really cool kind of art house film. I don't know. But what's great about Mad Max is that there is no lore. There's virtually zero lore. There was a war about oil. Here we are, right? And these movies tend to like really just focus on the characters involved in these situations. They don't need to have all of this extra. Oh, what happened? How did the world end? Oh, where did Mad Max get his car? Although in the first Mad Max he does show how he gets his car. But that's not something they keep going back to, right? And if you follow the movies one by one, they're not even like chronologically linked in any way that makes any coherent sense. You can try to put them in chronological order, but there's always inconsistencies that just they're little contradictions that make it so that they can't even really be in the same timeline. But that's not the point of the movie. The point of the movie is to serve you some cool settings, some cool action with some interesting characters and in interesting situations, right? And I would even go so far as to like say that the reason that Furiosa didn't do so well, because I liked Furiosa, it was a great movie, but Furiosa was the first Mad Max movie to be a direct prequel with a direct line of chronology, right? Furiosa takes place directly before Fury Road, right? And in Furiosa, you get all of this lore for stuff that was in Fury Road, like the Green Place and how how these guys came to power and all this other stuff, and Mortan Joe, how he came to be, and all the stuff around that. And sure, it was wonderful. And Chris Hemsworth was actually awesome in that movie. He plays an amazing Mad Max villain, and I don't even necessarily like. I don't dislike him, but I don't necessarily like him as an actor or whatever. But I think that's why Furiosa didn't do so well, because the entirety of the Mad Max series is like this vagueness forces you to just focus on the characters, what they're doing, what they're dealing with, the decisions that they make, why they make these decisions, So the absence of lore actually can provide you grounds for making a really good story. And then there's one more movie I want to talk about, and this is less about the movie itself and more about the shit that I read in the reviews, right? So I just recently watched this movie, The Platform. I think it came out in 2017. And it's like a vaguely sci-fi esque, interesting. Um, I don't even want to describe this. It's like a situational drama, I guess. Everybody is in this situation where they're essentially stuck in a prison with several levels. There's two people per level. This platform with food on it comes down once a day. You can eat whatever you want for a certain period of time, and then it goes down to the next level. And and all the drama that ensues in a situation like that. This is not a believable situation, right? It's more like a fairy tale than it is like sci-fi. Um, and the point of this movie was to have an interesting premise, uh, but it's mostly to have real heavy allegorical themes. It was done pretty artistically. The characters were interesting and well written. Cinematography was good. Now, there is a sequel to this movie that is not as good. I agree with the reviews that say that it's not as good as the first one, but I don't agree that it's as bad as they say it is. The second one was fine. I just don't think there was a reason to make it because the first one does the job. Because it is an allegory. It's not it's not trying to build a universe. But the problem that I had is that when you go and you read the reviews, people are like, "Oh, this would have been a 10 out of 10 movie, but there was no answers. There was no explanation. They didn't explain why the prison came from. They didn't explain the science behind how the elevator worked. They didn't explain what was at the bottom floor. It's like, brother, sister, that's not the point of the movie. That was not the point of the movie. The point of the movie was to offer a fucking pretty harsh and brutal criticism of the life that we're living right now, right? So the fact that there were no answers to these essentially lore-based things, the people with the lore brain, because these things weren't explained, they're like, "Oh, it's a bad movie." It's like, you dumb, please just watch the movie and take what it's trying to show you, right? And enjoy it and think about it and use your brain. You don't need to have every little thing explained, right? And here's a little side note about quote unquote plot holes. This is something that came up a lot in these reviews as well. And I hear this term thrown around a lot. A plot hole is not an unanswered question, period. A plot hole is not missing information. A plot hole is a direct contradiction or something that's incongruous, right? If earlier in the story they say A, and then later in the story they say B, that's a plot hole. If earlier in the story they say A, and they never bring it up again, that's not a plot hole. That's just a lack of information about A, right? So plot holes, missing information is not plot holes. A plot hole is like a direct contradiction, or missing information that is crucial to the events of the story, right? So yeah, that's my side rant about plot holes. Potholes, that's a different thing. I live in fucking Rhode Island, so we can go swimming in one if you want. But anyway, so this all shows me that a lot of people, these lore brain people, they're just uncomfortable with ambiguity. They need things spelled out. They're unable to like look at the symbolism of a movie and interpret it. And in its place, they would rather just have 3,000 factoids about the world that this story is taking place in. And honestly, you just can't write a story based on that. Because lore is not story. Lore is setting. Anyway, looks like this time I went a little bit longer than my last short video. But, so be it, whatever. But I am going to wrap up, and I'm going to leave you to it. Do me a favor. Like, comment, subscribe, all that fun YouTube happy horse shit. But more importantly, if you care to, please check out my Patreon. It's still a work in progress. As I get patrons, I'll figure out what the different tiers mean. But in the meantime, feel free to check it out. And other than that, I'm out.